Christian Call is my uncle. He married my mother's sister, Annie Ruger. Uncle Chris was born in a log cabin in Chesterfield in 1887. He was named for his uncle, Christian Nelson. Uncle Chris was sustained as bishop of the Chesterfield ward, as mentioned, in 1917, and served for almost 17 years. He was a member of the Idaho State High Council for 6 years. In 1941, he was sustained as the fourth president of the Idaho State, serving in that position for over 7 years. Uncle Chris owned the store in Chesterfield for many years. He extended credit to everyone and carried many people for a number of years. Some of the accounts were never paid for by people who left the area. Instructions were given during the time of rationing as to how to distribute them among the people in the valley, so that all would have a fair share. Uncle Chris became one of the largest landowners and stock raisers in the valley. A number of the present-day landowners got their land from Uncle Chris. He was one of the original members of the Chesterfield Land and Livestock Company and served for over 40 years, 30 years of this time as president and the rest as a director. He was a member of a number of other organizations, and he was mentioned in Who's Who for Idaho in 1950-1951. In 1946, Annie and Uncle Chris moved from their house near the store and moved over to the ranch, which Chris Nelson had built, and they owned it. Uncle Chris's contact with the first presidency and the presiding bishopric of the church resulted in the Daughters of the Utah Pioneer receiving a 50-year lease on the old Chesterfield meeting house. He bought the pump for the well so the DUP would have a system for beautifying the grounds. He stated that he wanted to pay the electrical bill as long as he lived, which he did, and after his death, and Annie continued to pay it until she expired. It is stated, behind every good man, there is a good woman. Uncle Chris had such a good woman. And Annie worked tirelessly, making a home, caring for the sick and afflicted, saving lives, delivering babies, preparing bodies for burial, providing for and serving the general authorities in their home, and oh, so much more. And Annie and Uncle Chris aided a great many people, financially, materially, physically, and spiritually. They sold the ranch in 1959 and moved to Bancroft. And Annie and Uncle Chris had one daughter, Myrna Louise Call Tusher. While Uncle Chris was serving his Central States mission, he had as a companion the man who is now president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Spencer W. Kimball. Uncle Chris passed away in 1969 and Aunt Annie in 1979. I had a special association with Aunt Annie and Uncle Chris. I shall always revere and bless their names. The 50th anniversary of the organization of the Chesterfield Ward was under the direction of Uncle Chris Call. Everyone in the community participated. They cooked and cooked, prepared straw ticks for more comfortable sleeping on the floor for the relatives and friends who would come. They readjusted furnishings to make room, did everything possible in anticipation of the fun time that it was going to be. And funny it was. There was a Bowery. They played games, ate and ate the food prepared by the good cooks of the ward. And they had the ever-popular baseball game, visited almost without ceasing, danced, and enjoyed the three-act play, Miss Cherry Blossom. Those who participated in this play are Cherry Blossom, Ida Dayton; Kokimo, M. Vernon Higginson; John Henry Smith, Argel Davids; Henry Foster Jones, J. Ansel Hatch; Horace Worthington, Lawrence Holbrook; James Young, Everett H. Call; Jessica Vanderpool, Grace L. Orton; Togo, Theron Davids. All present were interested in the romance they observed blooming between widow Charlotte Toman Meekum and widower George T. Higginson. It resulted in marriage and many happy companionable years. Will we have the opportunity to do some matchmaking and watch love bloom at our 100th anniversary? Oh, I hope so.
About the time of the 50th anniversary of the Chesterfield ward, Christian Call was released as bishop. He was replaced by J. Ansel Hatch, who served until 1941. In 1941, Ansel's brother, Ammon Paul Hatch, replaced him as bishop. Bishop Paul served until 1952. At that time, the wards of the Portneuf Valley were consolidated and a new bishopric was sustained. Something that was very important to all the early settlers of the Chesterfield Valley was music. Today, Theron Davids is with us. Theron, tell us a little bit about the music of Chesterfield.
Well, when I first started playing these bowls, Doc Clarkfield, he was playing the accordion. And they were pretty well musically inclined. Doc and Dad played too. And then he got to tell me I was a bowl player. So I decided maybe I was. And so I tried it for a while.
And play us some bone music.
Okay.
Theron, that was great music.
Thank you.
I hope if you've recovered from that, we can talk a little bit about the brickyard. We're standing here now on the site of the brickyard of Chesterfield, where the brick was fired for nearly all of the brick buildings in the Portneuf Valley. Theron, why don't you tell us what you remember about being in the brickyard and working here?
Okay, Bishop. I got me a job as a kid here packing molds for the brick. Ott Millward and I packed the brick for these schoolhouses, and Ott lived right over there, and he furnished the horse that run the treadmill. Now the dirt all come out of that hill right there, and I've got a piece of brick here in my hand that come from this brickyard, and a fellow by the name of Hoffman from Pocatello run the brickyard. And right out here north of us is where they had the yard. And him and Arnold Tall, I don't know, some of you will remember Arnold, they used to keep it all smoothed up, and they'd put burlap sacks on the brick that was drying. And Bill Orton molded the brick out. They had a treadmill like here and a horse on it, and Bill stood in a hole up to his stomach, and he would mold the brick, throw it in the mold. Ott and I would pack them out and dump them, and then we'd come and put them in the water, and then we'd go to a sandbox and sand them right good. That's why those brick are all red and hard. And Bill, then he would take the mud on a platform, then he would throw the mud in the mold, and he had a kind of a half moon with a sharp wire on it that he would scrape right down the top, take all the excess mud off, and he had the mold full then. Then we'd walk out here 50 yards or more and dump it on the ground and see that they were all out nice, you know. And then Hoffman and Arnold would cover them with burlap and keep that burlap wet. Now, I don't quite remember where the water come from unless it came around that ditch up there. It could have done. I don't know. And then after they made a kind of a, I don't know what you call it. But anyway, that's where they were burnt. And they had big drafts underneath it when they put that sagebrush in. They got the sagebrush from out on the flat to burn that. And it had such a draft to it that it made an awful fire. No. Now this pile that's behind me here is broken brick, and the brick that wasn't any good, so they just throwed it off in the pile. And it's been there for 40 years, I guess. Pretty close. Now, this piece of brick here I have in my hands is part of the brick that was burnt here. And I don't think they got a good red on this. But that's a good hard brick. It's hard. Those first brick they made here were soft. They were pretty soft. But this is a real hard brick. It's just like rock. So this is one we picked up here.
There's more to the Portneuf Valley than Chesterfield. Here, tucked away in the northwest corner of the valley, was a small place called Topance. Let's go there and meet some of the progenitors of the early settlers in this part of the valley.
Topance was named after Alexander Topance, who had a lot of cattle here when the settlers started to come in. Part of the Chesterfield Ward and Kelly Ward were grouped together to form Topance Ward. Topance Ward was organized September 21st, 1921, under the direction of Idaho State President Nelson J. Hogan. Benjamin Denmark Jensen was the first bishop, Chancellor Loveland, first counselor, Thomas Reese, second counselor, and Parley P. Jensen, clerk. Under Bishop Jensen's supervision, Topance Ward became one of the leaders in the Idaho stake. He was largely responsible for the erection of the Topance Chapel, which was a frame and concrete building. The men worked at a sawmill up Topance Canyon to get the lumber for this building. Some of the men spent all week at the sawmill, coming home only on weekends, while others took their team and wagons up every day and brought home a load of lumber. The women and children took care of things at home while they were gone. When they built the building, everyone pitched in to help. About the time the stake building was built in Bancroft, the Topance Church was considered the best building in the stake. Joseph Elmer Simons served as mutual president and as Sunday school superintendent. Mutual was always held regardless of weather. If there was a blizzard, it was never considered if church or any of the meetings should be canceled. The next bishop was Parley P. Jensen, and he was married to Jenny Call, my great-aunt, who was the daughter of Chester V. Call and Annis Barlow. Jasper W. Perkins, my grandfather, who moved from Chesterfield, was called as the third bishop. His counselors were my grandfather, Granville Call, and Orson Shipley. He served until the consolidation of the Topons and Kelly wards. This is a picture of Mrs. Ollie Brangham. This is a picture of Elva Call with her husband, Granville Call, on their wedding day. Grandma Call and Sister Brangham were two outstanding trail builder teachers who worked in the primary association. At that time, about 30 families lived here. The first school was a frame one with a cement foundation, and it was located south of this church over there on the hill. The brick school was built about 1919. Joel, let's go over by the brick school, and you can tell me a little bit about your school days there.
We were always ridden to school. One morning the weather was about 45 to 50 degrees below zero. We left home and rode the horses to school. My sister Virginia froze her ears, and the horse froze up its lungs and died right after we arrived at school. Wilder Hatch, being a school teacher, excused me from school to go home and get a team to come pull the horse away from the post where it was tied right over here across the road. And I pulled it up above the canal in a hole over there where I left it.
What about the school, Joe? Tell us a little bit about that school.
Well, we had sleigh riding parties. Played baseball was one of our main sports. At noon hour, we used to ice skate on the feeder canal over here. Quite often, we would be skating and miss hearing the school bell ring. Therefore, we would be late getting back to school. We had wrestling matches, boxing matches, put on several plays.
What about the grades in the school, Joel? Where were they located?
The West Room over here had from the first grade to the fourth grade in that room, and the room on the east had the fifth through the eighth grade.
What about the three schools together? Did they ever have any activities, Joel?
In the spring of the year, we would all get together, the three schools, and have a field day. And we would have foot racing, broad jumping, play jacks, and marbles, and participate in various sports of that nature. I've lived here 61 years and enjoyed every minute of it.
Topance holds a very special place in my heart. On the banks of the Topance Creek is where I was born and raised. My father, Wayne and Marcel Hatch, still live here. The Topance area is a gathering place for my brothers and sisters each summer. As we meet, we recall many fond days of going up and down the creek fishing, wading, and of hunting the deer in these beautiful mountains. Let's go now south of the Tauponce area and visit about the Kelly Ward.
I'm Selma Van Orden Redford, the fourth daughter of Roy Van Orden and Mabel Pratt Van Orden. They moved into the valley in 1914 and lived here for many years. Now I would like to just visit with you for a while. Mike Whitworth and family and his wife, Emily Kelly, and her brother Edwin Kelly and Jack Whitworth came here in 1897 and later homesteaded here. We were in Chesterfield Ward then, but with more people moving in, Bishop Carl Loveland of the Chesterfield Ward organized the branch Sunday School about 1906 with Ed Kelly as Sunday School superintendent. They held Sunday School in what they called the Turner School, a one-room wood frame building on the north side of the road between the Portneuf River and where Lee Crockett now lives. And the little blonde girl on the left-hand corner in a white dress. And standing right behind me is President Herbert K. Whitworth. And these are our classmates. A branch relief society was organized the 26th of May, 1913, with Emily Whitworth as the first relief society president and Lula Nelson as the first counselor, then Kate Whitworth as second counselor and treasurer. July the 15th, 1915, the Kelly Ward was organized with Michael Whitworth as their first bishop, Edwin F. Kelly, first counselor, Lawrence Merkley as second counselor, and William S. Muir as clerk. For a while, they held church in the Kelly School. It was south of Dick Nelson's home where he lives now. The Turner School was moved in for the first lower grades to hold school in. And later, Morris Perkins bought it, and my father remodeled it, and that is the home where DeLoss Perkins lives now. The four upper grades and high school was held in a larger building. It had a basement in where they used to have entertainment, and we also had our school lunches in the basement. Later, Alma White bought the schoolhouse and had it remodeled for a home, and this is where Fred White is living now. The school district built a four-room cottage for the teachers to live in, and later Ammon Hatch bought it and moved it to Bancroft, which he built into a home. Now, these three buildings were used for schools, churches, and homes for about 60 years. Next, the church met in the Gooch School, named after some early settlers, George, Jack, and Louis Gooch. This red building replaced a wooden frame building which burnt down. About 1920, Chesterfield and Tauponce each built a building. This is Wilder Hatch and Mrs. Boyett, Marjorie Holbrook's mother, when they taught school there. In 1924, August Sanders became the next bishop, with Roy Van Orden and Hiram Miles as counselors. Emily Whitworth was still Relief Society president, and they still held their meetings in their homes. Because the population had decreased, Kelly Ward joined the Bancroft Ward from February to November in 1927. November the 17th, 1927, Kelly was organized into a branch with Asa F. Hatch as presiding elder, Roy Van Orden first counselor, Hiram Miles second counselor, and Milton Whitworth as clerk. In 1934, my mother, Mabel Van Orden, was sustained as Relief Society president. On January the 24th, 1937, Kelly was made a ward again with Asa F. Hatch as bishop, Bernal W. Fowler, first counselor, Ross D. Redford, second counselor, and Francis M. Whitworth as clerk. Bishop Hatch served in this position until a consolidation of all the wards in 1952.
In 1880, long before the railroad came into this area, a young boy, Ransom Hatch, from Bountiful, Utah, arrived in this valley to work for Chris Nelson and Chester Call. He was very impressed with the country, especially when his eyes fell upon a beautiful nook in the northeast section of the valley, which would make a good pasture for stock. He therefore contacted his two brothers, William and Thomas, and described this choice piece of land, urging them to join with him in filing a claim and establishing a right for a homestead. They soon came, and from then on, this part of the Portneuf Valley was called Hatch.
I'm Roy F. Hatch. I'm a grandson of Ransom Hatch, who first came into this valley. I've lived here all my life, and of course this is originally a place where it's called Hatch, I guess.
Well, we've come here to see you because we need to learn about the Hatch area, so let's talk about it a little bit.
Well, you know, Grandpa Hatch came here in 1880, and after he'd spent the winter, he was ready to go back, but then when spring came, it was so beautiful that he sent for his brothers. And there were actually 4 brothers here at one time. Of course, that's why it was called Hatch, is because there were so many brothers. There was other people who lived up here to the east. We have Milt Hogan, who lived up there, and the Williamses lived down in the field to the west, and Uncle Will Hatch lived down by where Nancy Stratman is presently living, and Uncle Thomas Hatch, he lived where the Ringley-Spakers are living, Lane Ringley-Spaker at this time. He lived at that area. So there are many Hatches in the area, and as well as other people, and it was a great place to live. And you can see by the beautiful valley here that it would be a becoming place for a person to make their home.
I bet that this old sheep camp could tell a few stories.
Yes, this sheep camp belonged to my father, and he had about 1,000 head of sheep, and Ernest Hogan, he had about 2,000 head of sheep, and these were the 2 largest herds on this side of the valley. There were other sheep in the valley, but these were the 2 largest up in this area. And they used to have shearing in the spring, and they tell me that Aunt Sophia Higgison used to cook for the shearers.
You know, Uncle Roy, it seems like every time I come up here, I hear a new horse story.
Yeah, you know, they tell about Ammon Hatch was over at Grandpa's place, Grandpa Ransom Hatch's place one day, and they said they heard this rider coming like crazy down the road, and he was yelling for him to stop his horse, and so they spread out across the road with their arms out, and old Snip, the horse he was riding, came to a sudden stop, and Billy Y. Higgison, who was riding the horse, he flew over his head and down onto the ground. It's kind of funny, I guess. I guess he didn't have time to get off the right way. Well, let's get together here, and I'll ride on down to the schoolhouse, and we'll take a look at the school situation now.
All right. Be careful there.
I'll try. This school was built in 1915, but originally they held school in the homes of the people that lived in the area, and Margaret Hatch and Billy Y. Higgison were the teachers. Later they moved the school to the old Hatch Church House, which it stayed for many years. J. Leonard Hatch and Olive Hogan, Osborne Hatch, Jenny Paul were among some who first graduated from the 8th grade, were the first graduating class of the 8th grade in the Hatch area. And then in 1915, when the house was built down here, J. Leonard Hatch was the first teacher in the area. This picture is of one of the classes that was in the old Hatch school, which Leonard Hatch taught while he was there. Harl Hatch was the caretaker for this Hatch school, and he showed the school moms a pretty good time and kept them happy.
This picture is a picture of William T. Higgison and his family. William was one of the original settlers in the Hatch area.
I am Elizabeth Higginson Call, the granddaughter of William Thomas Higginson. Grandfather was born in England, and before he came to America in 1858, he was a jockey in the racing stables. He was a polygamist and moved with his 2 wives and children to the Portneuf Valley and settled in Hatch in 1883. Grandmother, Christina Young, came to America as a stowaway on the ship the John J. Boyd. Grandmother Christina, being a poetess, describes the Portneuf Valley as wild fruit in sweet luxuriance bloom. Wild flowers deck the plain. The streams are filled with mountain trout. The mountains filled with game. Grandmother was a midwife in the community and also assisted in many families in cases of illness. About 1890, men were being arrested for having plural wives, and grandfather, hearing the officers at the door, climbed out the window while the ladies were quilting and ran into the willows for protection. His daughter was screaming at her 2 brothers, and grandfather, mistaking the screams, came out of the willows and came face to face with the officers with drawn guns. He was promptly arrested and taken to Boise, Idaho, where he served 6 months in jail. While he was there, his daughter Hattie, who was then just 16 years of age, died. He was not permitted to return to her funeral. His 2 wives and their children had great respect and love for each other. The ladies were very fond of each other and very compatible. They often took up sides against grandfather. And when the Chesterfield ward was organized in 1884, grandfather became the ward clerk.
Born in Birmingham, England, George Williams joined the church as a youth, came to America, and crossed the plains with a handcart company. From Provo, he and his wife, Emma Jane, came to Hatch 99 years ago this month. They had 10 children. Emma Jane was a midwife and did extensive nursing in this area. To be the great-granddaughter of George Williams, and one thing that especially endears his memory to me is the fact that we share a love of walking. Great-grandpa walked across the plains, and he just never stopped. Even as a grown man, he would prefer to walk where he was going rather than ride, and he would often walk for miles. As he advanced in age, this concerned his grown sons, who would see to it that he was properly placed on a saddle before he left home. And dutifully he'd climb into the saddle and stay there until he was out of sight of the house and down around the hill, where he'd climb off the horse, then leading the horse happily continue his walk.
The church in Hatch was first made into a branch, with William A. Hatch presiding elder. On on November 20th, 1898, the Hatch Ward was organized from part of the Chesterfield Ward. There were about 150 members. The boundaries extended from what is known as the Perkins Lane on the north to include Ivans on the south. On the date of organization,